Hello, I'm Christine Merle from Children's Institute, and we're here today to talk about teaching tolerance through the power of expectation. Hopefully at this point you've completed all the other modules in the series, and so you have a good baseline of social-emotional learning, development, and the competencies, so that we can dig just a little deeper and think about another issue that affects many of our settings. Of course, we begin each one of these modules with a get-to-know-you icebreaker activity, and this one is no different. Hopefully this activity gives you an opportunity to reflect on your past practice and current practice and where you would like to go, and also give you some time to build those relationships with your peers. The activity is called front to front, back to back. Your moderator will give you even more instructions, but just to give you a little summary of what you're going to be doing. When the music starts, you're going to move around the room silently. When the music stops, you are going to pair up back to back with some other person in your classroom. At that point, your moderator will give you a question. Please take a good 5 to 10 seconds to really think about what your answer is going to be for that question. Your moderator will then give you front to front, and you can turn around and share your answers with your partner. Those 10 seconds are critical as they will help you process the question, but if you're going to use this activity in your classroom as well, it allows for learners at different processing rates to really think about good answers to questions. When your moderator says front to front and you get to share that answer, there's probably a few more questions that your moderator may have you think about, so the music may start again and you'll move around the room. I like this activity because it allows for discussion, and it also allows for some content to be woven into building those relationships as well. So complete the activity as your moderator shows you, and we'll see you back here at the end. Thank you for participating in that activity. I hope your moderator chose some good music for you to move around the room with. Just remember, as we go through this module, anytime that you see this light bulb, you know that we will be breaking for an activity. Let's look at our objectives for this session. We want to take a look at tolerance, but through the frame of reference of the power of our expectations. It's incredible when you think about how setting up students for certain types of success or failure really result in those successes and failures. We want to compare and contrast self-fulfilling prophecy, which many of you have probably heard of, and the even more dangerous sustaining expectations, and how powerful both of those things can be in your classroom. Lastly, we are going to spend some time reflecting on our own biases, and I'm really going to encourage you to walk toward bias. It is perfectly normal that we all have them, but the more aware of them we are, the better we can handle them, especially in those classroom settings when you have 15 things going on at once. So let's just begin with a simple activity to get us in that mode. Half of your group will receive one essay to grade, and the other half will receive a different one. Your moderator will help you actually grade these essays and report out a little bit, and I will see you back here for some discussion. I wonder how that activity fared in your setting. I have used it in many different districts and settings and populations, and I always have really high hopes that it's not going to come out with any kind of difference in the grade. Unfortunately, it usually doesn't. We see that there is usually a level of empathy or sympathy for that student who struggles, and they tend to get a higher grade than the student we have higher expectations for. It's interesting how we set up what our expectations are based on the description of the student. So I'm going to ask you to think about how that translates to other things. We know of families who may be struggling financially, but make sure that their students show up for those first days of school with new school supplies and new clothes because they feel that the teacher's expectations when you look a certain way are different. Is that true in your setting? What then can we do to combat some of that? Are there ways that we can standardize to help remove some of that expectation from our work? I know for myself that I've eliminated cover pages from the front of work, and they actually put it as the last page of a paper instead of the front. But you and I both know that after a few weeks, you tend to know whose work is who, even without that cover page. So really staying true to rubrics and examining those rubrics will help with some of that power of expectation. As we attempt to make that walk towards our biases, I want you to examine it even further. What we have for you is a gallery walk that should set up some situations for you so that you can read how actually powerful expectations can be in all different settings. At the end of that, your moderator will ask you to actually look at two definitions as well: self-fulfilling prophecy and sustaining expectations, so that you can have a conversation with a partner about which one is at work more in your classroom. And have you had moments where you look at a student whose siblings you may have taught and you've already set those preconceived notions into place? Take a few minutes to complete this activity and have those discussions so that we can move further with our work. What did you learn from that activity? I am amazed by some of those experiments. When I think about the high aptitude welders who actually then became the high aptitude welders, or the third graders who performed better when they felt that they were superior to their classmates, or the students who did better when they had heard something positive about a teacher. It really makes you think about all those conversations that you may have in the faculty lounge when you first get your class list. Do you stop and think about, oh, I know this family, or I know this student, or this is what I'm expecting from that student this year? That is that power of self-fulfilling prophecy versus sustaining expectations. Self-fulfilling prophecy actually allows you to say to any student, I'm setting the bar way up here for you, and I know that you can meet it. When unfortunately, sustaining expectations sometimes says, this is where you were, and this is where you're going to stay. It is actually the more dangerous of the two. So I really want you to think about your practice, your conversations, the things you find out about students, even when you read through those test scores when you first get your class list. Really try to separate some of those expectations you may have for those students, and keep in mind that you want to set that bar high, no matter what you know about them. So it's time to walk forward towards our biases. I really would like you to think about, in a brainstorming activity, what are the things that really impact the expectations of our students? For many of us, as we try to make a list of things that impact our expectations, certain factors come to mind immediately. Things like race or gender may be the first two items you put on that list. But I really want to push you to dig a little deeper and think about those factors other than race and gender that really impact your expectations when it comes to how a child looks, when it comes to what kind of family they come from, whether it comes to how late they are for school every day. Does it begin to influence your expectations? So your moderator will guide you through this as a brainstorming activity, and then you will take it a step further. And there's a series of questions I'd like you to answer as table groups or small groups as you think about your population and your students, just to open our eyes and walk towards those biases. How did that activity go? Did you stop and think, oh, I never thought about that one. I never thought that that maybe is influencing how I interact with certain students. I know as a middle school teacher, hygiene was a big one for me. I know that I shied away from certain students if they looked disheveled or their personal hygiene wasn't at its best. And I really had to walk forward in many different ways to make sure that the behavior that I modeled with those students was the same as what I did with everyone else. So those students still got many private interactions, squatting down next to their desk. They still got high fives. They still got little shoulder hugs when it was appropriate, so that I made sure that I tried to keep that playing field the same, even though I knew it was a bias for myself. Hopefully my behavior also modeled for other students the idea of openness and acceptance and tolerance for everyone, even though so many people are different from ourselves. So here we are, the strategy portion of all of our modules. And we're going to look at it from two lenses. Let's look at strategies that we can use with students to help them build some tolerance for each other. And then I'm also going to give you some strategies for teachers and things that you can do to really look at your own expectations and build some tolerance as well. So in terms of students, let's start with, I wish my teacher knew, and I wish my classmates knew. And I have a couple examples for you of prompts that a teacher gave their students to say, I wish my teacher knew, on a little Post-it, and those students handed it in. So the teacher could begin to examine some of those things that maybe you can't read in a file, or that students aren't going to share publicly in front of an entire room. But it does help you really change some of your expectations and your frame of reference for students. The second strategy for teaching tolerance in students has to do with classroom cohesion. And we know that classroom cohesion is actually a factor that impacts academic achievement as well. So not only will you be helping teach tolerance, but you'll actually be building relationships and improving some of those test scores potentially. Having students get to know each other is a huge part of our classroom. Their ability to be able to work with each other, know each other's names, build some empathy when they know something about their personal lives is critical as we look at a relationship-centered classroom. So we have two examples of ways that you can actually have students get to know each other. One in an elementary setting and possibly one in a middle or secondary setting. And we hope you take some time to look through those and see which ones you could use in your classroom. Another factor to look at to teach with students is the choices of literature that we use in a classroom. And I'm just showing you 3 here from different age groups so that you can see that the choices that we make and the books that we read to and with our students can really open up those conversations for students about teaching tolerance and acceptance and empathy. So for our elementary kids, we are looking at stories like Junkyard Wonder. And I have to tell you, I've actually used Junkyard Wonders with middle school students as well, in pieces, but as a little bit of SEL infusion in curriculum as I taught. We can use books like Wonder for those elementary ages that are a little bit older and possibly even parts of middle school. The nice thing about that book is that they write each chapter from a different perspective of a student, which really widens your lens. For our high school, I've chosen to talk about The Book Thief, which really did open up so many conversations in my own home when my teenager read The Book Thief for the first time and had many preconceived notions about Germans and World War II, and it started some really good conversations about tolerance. I'm going to take you back to one of the past modules when we did social awareness and we were really looking at those strategies when dealing with students in the moment. And this was one of those strategies I mentioned at that time. We looked at interrupt, question, educate, and echo. Every single time that you hear something. It does not have to be done in a punitive way, but in a way that we want to teach kids and have those educational moments when we hear them say something that maybe is showing a lack of tolerance for different populations or different groups. In those moments, every time you hear students make a comment and you think, well, this isn't what I'm going to address today, instead I'm really going to urge you to interrupt. Do some questioning. Why do you think that? What made you say that? And I wonder how many of those answers you're going to get are related to conversations that they may have heard out of context or in context in different settings, possibly family settings or school bus settings. Those are those educational moments where you can actually teach students what it is to think about from many different perspectives. And echo when you really hear students saying the right thing. Repeat it and reinforce as much as possible so that kids start to widen that lens and gain some of that tolerance for everyone. The last suggestion I have for you for teaching tolerance to students are actually related in these 2 websites. Teachingtolerance.org and commonsense.org have a ton of materials for educators to use in their classrooms. They have learning plans, film kits, student texts, and all kinds of activities that you can use with your students as you walk towards this teaching tolerance and starting to look at our bias. Now let's transition and really think about you as the teacher and how we can broaden your perspective and the strategies that you can use for yourself. It's funny that our first one is actually knowing yourself and having a strong sense of identity, having a strong sense of empathy, being really rooted in your values, and modeling that every day for your students. That should be one of the easy ones. The second one that we want to look at is a classroom diversity audit. I'm going to ask you to look critically at your classrooms. What do the pictures on your walls represent? What do the book choices that you have on your bookshelves look like? Really ask yourself, does my classroom actually represent the entire world population and I'm trying to bring it in to educate my students? Or does it just mirror the students that I have in front of me? That audit may help you start to build in some of those other pieces that will open up conversations with your students. Number 3, again an easy one, high expectations for all students, no matter how they look, no matter what their background is, but letting each student know my bar is set so high for you and I know that you're going to be able to hit it with me this year. If you haven't read The Junkyard Wonders, I encourage you to go and read it over the summer when you have a few minutes, because I really do think it lights that fire of showing every student how powerful they can be. Number 4, really listen to our students and families. And I know that is an easy thing to say, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. But all those connections we can make when I can actually stop, squat down, get eye to eye with a student, and take those few minutes to really listen to their concerns. In the same way, reaching out to our families and listening to some of their stories and their backgrounds and where they're coming from will really help us shape what our classroom and our relationships look like. So you know I've said it a million times already in this module, but I'm going to say it again. There is nothing wrong with the fact that we all have certain biases. It is perfectly normal. However, pretending they don't exist and not being aware of them could potentially harm our students. So I'm going to encourage you again and again, walk towards those biases so that you become aware and they have less power over you. Project Implicit at harvard.edu has all of those different bias tests that you can take. I mentioned them in the social awareness module, and I really encourage you. They've made it so easy to take them on your smartphone or your pad. It's such an easy few minutes to just start thinking about all the different ways that we might impact our expectations for students based on those biases. The last one I'm going to encourage is lots and lots of reading. And as educators, I know you're doing that all the time anyways. But I'm always looking for books that kind of challenge my feeling or my thinking about certain things. And the last two that I've just read recently have to do with the black and white achievement gap, which is kids don't want to fail. And I'm also reading Far from the Tree, which has to do with identity and students and gender and all of those other issues that seem to be facing so many of our students and have come to the forefront of our conversations lately. You can always check out our website where there is a resources page so that you can see what we're reading and other possible resources that will help support your work. All right, we've made it to the end of this module, but you know we have to do a little bit of closure so that we can see what you've learned, what you're thinking about, and where you want to take it next. So everyone should have one sheet of paper, and I'm just going to ask you to write down one thing that you're thinking about regarding expectation, regarding tolerance, regarding strategies. Go ahead. Put that one thing on your paper. You can make it nice and big. Your moderator will give you instructions on what to do next, although you can probably get a hint from what we've put on here for you. Have that conversation with your group, and I look forward to working with you again soon.